Kevin, what's going on, man?
All is good. Spring is springing.
I am really enjoying this series. We've had a lot of people reach out and say how much they like it. This is part 4 of our scaling series. So if you haven't listened to the previous 3 episodes, go back and look at those. But me and Kevin are doing, man, I just did an outline and sent it to you, but I think it's like 28 weeks of everything you need to do to scale a company. It's very in depth, and
Ah,
Kevin knows so much. And I'm like, man, we got to get all this out of this man. So let's do a 28-week series where we're just talking about scaling a company. Kevin, how have you enjoyed it so far?
I'm loving it. And when you sent me the outline and then giving me a little bit advance notice of what the topic's going to be, because we've been kind of going shotgun approach until this
Yeah.
week. I've actually done a lot of homework on how I would answer these instead of just kind of thinking out loud. Because when you're ad libbing or you're on a microphone or whatever, sometimes you kind of get starry eyed and kind of don't go down the right
Hmm.
path. So I did some homework. I'm excited. The questions. This is a great topic. I think I'm pumped for this one. And your outline is in detail. I mean, it really goes through step by step of going from almost ground zero startup business to a very successful business. And I've even over the last week, I've seen some other videos of some other companies that just really irk me and some of the
Hmm.
lack of processes that they're showing people. And it's more the starry eyed what they saw in a video that kind of sells the video compared to what's actually I'm seeing in the background of the failures. It's kind of
Hmm.
disheartening. So, not that we'll talk into that, but I think some of these questions and the answers to them will kind of bring some of those scenarios to light.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're new to this podcast, the whole purpose of this scaling series, me and Kevin are putting it together, is to sort of start. We talked about it, Kevin, but the Main Street Revolution, where we want to put money back in the hands of people, and we're not going to do it through the government or whatever. We're going to do it through teaching people to build a a financial instrument, so your business, and you can pour back into your community that way. So we want to teach you how to grow a company so that you can invest in your community, and that's how you put money in the hands of the people. You educate them, and with their own accord, they can grow something great and really start, helping people out locally, because that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, a perfect example today was it wasn't so much a coaching call. It was more kind of like a mentor check-in. And the topic was a team member that he's hired, and he's very young. I'm not going to go over age in case anyone's listening that knows this individual in this company, but he has a younger individual that's come in and just has a fire under his butt. And his desire is to work deeper into the business and understand it better. And he's looking already at this age, he can't even vote yet, of wanting to be more involved in small business. And I told the gentleman who was speaking to him, like, you need to latch on to this young lad and really bring him under your wings and show him a path of success. Because this person who owns the business is on his way towards an exit. And that exit could be 7 years, it could be 10 years, I doubt it would be 5, but it's a business that's not a recurring revenue. So it's a design build. So you're selling for
Hmm.
tomorrow. And as I mentioned to him, I says, your business is worth nothing. No one's going to buy that. There's nothing that a private equity or another company is going to buy, because once Mrs. Jones has a patio, they have a patio. But I said, what about this path? And I think this is a path that you and I really want to help people understand. And we can coach people to do this in 2 directions. One is this new lad, bring him in and get him a title, get him responsibilities, get him making decisions so that you can say, listen, I want to take you under your wing and I want you to buy this business for me in 7 or 10 years. I want to
Hmm.
help you owner finance this so that you can take over this legacy after I teach you everything I have. Those are what we need to do to get our businesses sold, because a lot of us are in the situations where we're not going to be able to sell to a big company, or we don't have a tuck in from another company that's going to take us in, or our services are not recurring revenue and it's not attractive to a business that wants to buy. So, I think we have the same mental aspect that we want to help young people find businesses like that where they can come in and be that uh, journeyman and move into the business end of it and slowly buy the person out, as well as the businesses we're working with prepare themselves that they look down a different path, that they could sell this to an employee or a journeyman that comes in and set them up for success that way.
That's great, just to go ahead and start be thinking about that far in advance. And what you're really talking about is liquidity. So the reason a lot of companies on the stock market will trade for a higher valuation than something private is because they're more liquid. They can easily be turned to cash more. And what you're saying there is to make a business more liquid by kind of enhancing the buyer pot, and that's going to make your business essentially worth more in the long run, and hopefully a nice change of hands as well.
Yeah, and the continuation, and like we're saying with this Main Street movement of getting the working class people back working again, and being energized and paying into our system and re-energizing locally compared to federally, which the federal doesn't seem to really help us much.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, today's topic is going to be something we're both pretty familiar with, laying a solid financial foundation. I was more curious to see your point of view than my point of view, as you have dealt with, I would say, a lot more numbers than I have since you've been in 40 years in the industry, specifically for lawn care. I've dealt with a lot of numbers, but I've dealt with them in different industries. And I've done lawn care for 5 years, but I mean, heck, you did it for 40 years. So there's something to be said about that. So I really wanted to go over this because the school doesn't really teach any of this stuff. And so people have to learn this from somewhere, just learn the concept of what makes a market, what makes something valuable, what makes something investable, what makes something sellable. And so just kind of building a framework out to start with, just learning how kind of money works inside of a lawn care company. So what do you think the importance of keeping your business and your personal separate, and the best way to do that?
Great topic, since if you are an LLC, or I'm sorry, if you're an S Corp and above, March 7th, today was the end of tax day. So we're recording this on the 17th. So, when I am an S corporation, so I have some different laws and rules I have to follow, thanks to Sheila Chaplin, Reliable Tax Services, that help me navigate through them, and how important it is to keep those separate legally. Then we go into the ethical part and or the structure of that business being solvent and understanding what is your money and what is the business's money for planning for future expenses and what you're taking away. So as an S corporation, I have to take a salary. So I have a paycheck that comes out of the business. LLC, owner operator, solopreneur, a lot of the times that's just going to be whatever profits are there or draws that are taken monthly, yearly, quarterly, however you do that. I have to take a mandatory payroll out of that company. So when you start intermixing business expenses and personal expenses, if you're an LLC and or above, you've basically what they call pierced that company veil. And what that means is anytime that you have intermixed that money, and heaven forbid an audit does happen, now your personal monies basically become part of the business money in the audit, and penalties and fines, and they can go back 7 years once they find a mistake. So it's very important on the legal side of it, but on the business side of it, there's no way, if you don't have your monies separate, that you can actually do any forecasting or understand your profits. I think we talked about this at the Lawn Care Life of, most people don't know what their gross profit is or their net profit is, but they know how many mowers they have, or they know how many feet of weed whacker string they have in stock. And the real numbers really need to know are those numbers: profit, gross, net, margin. And if those are confusing to you, that's a real good reason to have a landscaping bookkeeper, because all that is explained and laid out and spoken in each monthly meeting so that you know how to forecast for that. Make sense to you? Or
No, yeah, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, especially when you start hitting that S Corp status, they really start putting a magnifying glass on you.
Yeah. Like I said, this weekend was tax season and going through everything, and just that magnifying glass, so just going through your cash balance sheet and profit and loss and making sure everything is in the correct buckets, because the higher level you are in the tax return, the more apt you are to possibly getting a red flag go up and an audit happening.
100%. All right. So we hear a lot of talk in the green industry lately. I've heard it a lot more recently than probably 5 or 6 years ago when I started, but everybody's talking about COGS these days. COGS and overhead. I hear them thrown around all the time, just like I hear profit thrown around. Kevin, can you define what COGS and overhead are so that people can understand? Because I think a lot of people just throw it out there and they have no idea what they're talking about most of the time, to be honest.
So COGS, cost of goods sold. And that, I guess the simple way is it's what directly goes into delivering the service you have. So if you're a design build guy, your COGS are going to be materials. Let's say it's a patio you're doing, so it's going to be your base, your edging, the stone, the work that you're doing, sweep sand, all that stuff. Those are basically what your COGS are going to be. When your mowing service, it gets a little bit more into your direct labor, fuel, stuff like that is going to be kind of more of your cost of goods because you don't have a product or a tangible piece that you're leaving the customer with. It's more of your labor and material that's involved with that. Overhead, those are the things that really you need to be, that happen and charge just to keep the lights on in the building, to keep running. So your overhead is going to be, let's say if you do have a building, your truck, fuel, insurance, all those marketing, office expenses, equipment maintenance, those things are more labeled to the overhead that's going to be there, and that you're going to take, let's say, a total of those and divide those out into your hourly rate that you're going to be charging or square foot price that you're going to be charging, so that they're spread across the job that you're putting in with the cost of goods of the job that you're going to be doing with. So with me in fertilization, a lot of my cost of goods are the materials that I'm putting down on the lawn to make it green. And then you have your overhead that you're going to blend into that, so that when you come up with, we charge by the 1,000 square foot or by the acre price, that you have a blended amount of your cost of goods plus all your overhead and expenses that it takes to run your business blended into your charging and getting that money back.
What do you think the importance of knowing that is as early as possible? Because I think a lot of guys get into it and they don't even really technically know what it is until they're at that $500,000 mark most of the time.
This is the foundation of a business. I mean,
right.
If you don't, and please do not take an offense if you do not know what it is. Reach out to us. We want to help you understand that, because you're just going to be smarter in business. But if you don't know exactly what your cost of goods are or what it takes to run your business on the overhead side, you have no idea what you're charging. You have no idea if you actually are making money. A lot of times, I know you and I have talked about it, where some of these large design build companies that are out there doing these amazing projects, and they're cool as heck. A lot of times they're not really getting down into the weeds of every minute that it takes to do that job. The prep, the travel back and forth, the sale of the job, checking on warranty, replacing the plant that dies. All that has to go into the complete review of the job to see if you are making money. And if you don't know your cost of goods, if you don't know what your overhead expenses are, how can you come up with that number? So
right.
Even if you do it at the basic level and just napkin math, as we call it, write down your job cost expenses, and then on the slash, look on the other side and think about what it takes for you to run your business. What are the main things that happen in your business, no matter if you're doing the job or not? Those have to be paid. Start figuring that out so that you can kind of do some division to figure out exactly what you need to be charging per man hour or per 1,000 square foot.
It gets tricky too, because what happens is when you first start out, you buy, well, first of all, you'll have no overhead essentially when you start out. So you don't really know how to price that in. And then second of all, when you do start getting overhead, guys will buy too much equipment, and then their overhead will be kind of ballooned. And then they'll start charging the customer for that. And then when the business gets a little more stable, you're kind of buying equipment more efficiently. And so the overhead will start to come down, although you'll have some admin costs start to come in there. So it's a lot to it. You can't just say my overhead is this and then it stays this. There's a lot of fluctuations at it in the beginning. So reach out to a mentor or just find what other guys are pricing at in the area, because your overhead will fluctuate a lot in the beginning. It's not something that's really steady until you get to, we'll say even $1 million or something like that.
And when you get into the scaling part of it, I mean, you brought up a really good point to where when we were Russo and we were climbing the ladder of growth, Mike had all the numbers, and we broke this down into not just cost of goods and overhead. We did indirect, and we really broke it down into finite little buckets. But we knew with certain levels of equipment that was purchased, building space, trucks, we knew that we could leverage that overhead. It would cost us no more money in in equipment and
Hmm.
lights and insurance to do another $1 million. Sure, we would have to bring on some labor costs that were going to increase with it, but that's going to flow through. But we were set up to always grow another $1 million with what material, I'm not materials, with equipment that we had in house at all times. So
Right.
that leveraging the overhead, when you hear that, that's what that means, is what you have. Like you said, you didn't overbuy an equipment. You waited until you busted at the seams, so you needed to add one more mower, so that you weren't really heavy on equipment. Like you said, it's costing you money in taxes, it's costing you money in payments if you're paying that, and you're in hopes of that work happening.
Right. So what he's saying is your cost only go up in your cost of goods at that point because your overhead is essentially staying the same. And so
Yep.
you need to know the next tier that you can get to, although it's still going to cost you obviously labor, fuel, and materials. So
And that's where profit starts adding on quickly, is when you can really
exactly.
leverage that overhead and hold that tight and
Hmm.
get every last dollar out of what equipment you have before you make that next purchase.
Right. Right. So yeah, I think it's a concept that you need to learn as soon as possible. If we're talking over your head right now, you definitely need to get on the ball and start figuring out what it means. Reach out to one of us or
Yeah, I'd love
or
to
or a
help.
mentor, and yeah, we'd love to help you out. I talk about this all the time, and it never happens. And I just keep tooting the horn constantly. What's the importance of having a safety net in your business? So let's say 3 months of expenses or whatever it is, and when do you build that up?
So you're Dave Ramsey Jr.
I mean, I hear this as a pattern everywhere. Like Kevin O'Leary, all these guys are always talking about it. So it's just a pattern I noticed, and I do the same thing. I will never give advice on something that I'm not gonna do myself. Like I just don't do that.
And you do my book, so you know what type of safety net I carry. It's just
Absolutely.
super comforting for me, and I think it's something that is as important as understanding your COGS and overhead, just because of the fluctuation of the type of work that we do. If you are more in the recurring revenue part, you can kind of forecast your expenses and your profits a little bit easier than design build, because once that project is done, how many do you have you lined up from there? And then two, what type of money are you bringing in for holding of operating expenses, of buying materials for the next job, on, and it just gets bigger and bigger. So, I think right out the get go that all monies that come in, there should be a percentage, the Mike McAllowitz profit first type thing, that is set up for that safety net. It's very important. Perfect example: tax time is due, and we talk about putting 30% away for taxes. Put it away for taxes. I have it put away, but it hurts like heck when you got to part with it. and,
Right.
and but having that safety net, that's part of that safety net, of having that money there. So it does hurt, but I can sleep at night. I know that I have it all allocated. It just stinks to see it go bye-bye.
Yeah. Now, did you have a process for setting aside money for quarterlies, and what's your kind of tax strategy throughout the year?
So when you work with a tax professional like we do with Sheila Chaplin, she's already sent over my estimated schedule for 2025. So my first quarterly, I have to do state and federal, because in Connecticut we have to do state tax. She has that math already figured out. My first quarterly is due in April, just like most people's taxes are due in April. So you're going to kind of get that double bubble. But you following that is very helpful, that you pay into the state on time, because as she has explained, if you fail to pay in a proper percentage of quarterlies, you could be fined on the backside
Hmm.
in less of a reduction. And it's math that she does, so it's not like a penalty, but there's some exposure to the amount that you pay in and don't, and where it actually could increase the amount going in. So it's very important. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with federal and state government, they always win. So you might as well be upfront with them, and just, what's the worst that's going to happen? Maybe you get a net even, and at the end of the year, you don't have to pay, or a little bit back. I hate to get a return. That I rather have the money and make it interest in my own way, instead of the state or the Fed using it. But trying to be closer than I was this year. We had a great growth year, and we also were extremely efficient. So yeah, our quarterlies were not enough projected. So Sheila made changes for this year.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned how you'd like to kind of break to zero at the end of the year. because essentially what you're doing is just loaning the government money, and we call that in economics cost of capital. So, in a term that you should get familiar with is cost of capital, which brings me to I love what you do with your business. You essentially you have prepayments, and then tell us a little bit about that, how you collect your prepayments and you have interest paid on that throughout the year, because that is essentially people giving you the money to make money on throughout the year. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Sure. It's a blessing and a curse for a couple of reasons. One is right now the prepayments have come in and you see this wonderful nest egg, but now that money's still not mine. I have to go do the work. So it's like, oh man, I got all this great money,
Yeah.
but I owe these people all that work.
Mm-hmm.
What we do in the turf nutrition side of it is many companies offer a prepayment during the off seasons, whenever yours is, and that would be a X amount of percent discount. I do a 5% discount if you prepay for the season in advance. That money comes in, and as it comes in, that goes into a high yield savings, money market, however you want to call it. But right now, because interest rates are higher, money markets and high yield savings are paying out more of a dividend. So I take all that and throw that into a high yield savings that I can get money from quickly if I need it. But what I try to do, and it worked this past year, and we'll see if it works again this year, is I try to take that prepayment money and never touch it. So I put it in there, it makes my monthly interest, and then I work on the recurring revenue that comes on people that are paying as applications are done. And I just work very efficiently to not over exceed that amount that's coming in. And, I probably have a split of maybe a little bit more than a third pay for prepay, and the rest of the money is going to just happen weekly as I'm doing applications. So there's plenty of revenue coming in. The nice thing about it is you put it in that nest egg, it's making you interest. So you have money on there. Even if you have to use it throughout the season, you're still gaining that interest along the time of path before you have to use it. And that money is compounding while you're in there. And you still have that safety net to go back tap into if you do need it, if funds get low.
And that's actually making you more profitable throughout the year. Like several things that I've seen you do is it's not your net operating profit, it's just your profit overall, but it's making you extra money through the money that you're using. And another thing I see you do is you're a master at supply relations too, and materials and things like that. So all the things that I see that you do are edging out a little bit more profit because you've seen it done at the really high level. And so when you deal in a low margin business like lawn care, all those few little points that you're talking about add up, and especially if you start creating habits early.
And not to go down a rabbit hole, and because we have plenty more questions to go on, but this year, through my experience, knowing that it was an election year, I knew that chemical manufacturers and fertilizer companies were going to be looking to offer amazing deals in October, November, because they need projected sales for their end of year and into next year projections. So at that time, prices were down. End of the year, typically what we use, the products, nitrogen and stuff, are leveled off for the season. And sometimes they're trying to clean up some of their old inventory before they make their purchases for their next. But what I saw this year even more, and this is hard for me because I like to just pay my bills immediately, is they offered amazing terms on any early order purchases. So not only was there a discount, but a lot of the payment terms carried over to July 1st of 2025. So now I have application 1, 2, and 3 to go out and bill and put into another high yield savings to make interest on before I pay down the interest-free loan that they just gave me on the products. And again, that's different for me, but the deals were so exorbitant, I had to take them. It was crazy not to. Actually, one of my sales rep called me today, and the company that I bought one of the products that I use just offered an additional 10% kicker. I'm like, I didn't even do anything. I'm like, okay. So that was another conversation I had with Sheila in our preparing for this year. I said, Sheila, I'm going to do basically the same amount of revenue, but my costs are going to be X amount of percent lower than they were last year. So there we go. We have more profit coming in. So she had to do some more math to readjust my quarterlies that need to go in, just because I'm going to have more profits at the end. So you have more profits, the government's going to take more. And a lot of people say, well, spend down, buy something. Well, really, it's another theory that Mike Russo used to hate, and he burned it into me because, oh, it's a write-off, it's a write-off, it's a write-off. Well, they are write-offs. They really are. But would you rather have 70% of the money and give 30 to the government, or would you rather buy another truck just because you needed to spend money down and you don't want to pay tax on it? If you need the truck, and Sheila's a big proponent of that, if you need something for the business, please buy it. And if you have the money for it. But I rather take and pay the tax on the money and have the money to be mine so I can work with it instead of having another asset that's sitting out in the yard that you're paying property tax on and insurance and all these crazy things that isn't really that needed unless you need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Sheila's amazing. She's been doing, I think, construction and a lot of blue collar tax work for, man, I don't know, 30 plus years. You might know
She's been
more
doing
than
it a
me.
long time.
Anyway,
I
she's
don't
awesome.
know how she can do it every day. It's brutal.
I agree. One of the first things I was like, me and Megan didn't want to do was taxes. But Sheila goes to the tax conferences and keeps up with all that stuff. I'm so glad I don't have to do it. We can put her information in the show notes. If you guys want to reach out and get a hold of her, but highly recommend getting up with a tax professional and having them do, it isn't estimated quarterly. You have to put in a lot of inputs to figure out what the estimation should be. It depends on growth rate, a lot of expected expenses. There's a lot that goes into it. So it's nice to have a tax professional on your side for sure.
It's a well worth investment. I don't even think of it as a cost. I would be lost without her and you and Megan. Really, because you guys work together seamless on the backside where you guys are performing the profit and loss, the cash balance sheet that she does a lot of her math off of, on top of the quarterly meetings I have with Sheila. And then lately the quarterly meetings have been Sheila and Megan at the same time. So we have a 3-way consultation of where we're going to forecast and go through into the next quarter. It's awesome. I love those meetings.
Yeah, they're great. What was the biggest difference, Kevin, in knowing your numbers when you worked at Russo versus running your own solo operation? Or did you take a lot at Russo and just kind of build it into your own little solo framework? I know there's people think that there are big differences in businesses. Can you, expand on that? Do you think that there is a big difference in tracking the numbers at that level versus the small business level?
It's different in a way where when I was at Russo and then at Brightview, and don't take this as I was a leader, but I had people that produced a lot of those financial reports. It wasn't my responsibility. Sure, it was my responsibility to meet with them and go over them and understand them and then sell them or propose them to my higher ups who I had to report to.
I think the question would be more so Russo, because we can go into the Brightview thing. A lot of that is like a lot of the shareholder stuff, right? Like they have to show what their quarterly report's going to show. So you had to do a lot of numbers that you wouldn't normally have to do at the Russo. So tell us the difference at the Russo level versus the level that you're at currently, since you started your business in 2020 post-COVID.
So I took my education from Russo and brought it into my business, and I think that really was a huge advantage to me stepping off and going out on my own compared to some of the startup businesses or people that start with a side hustle and jump into it. So I already had the back knowledge of cost of goods, overhead, indirect expenses, having that nest egg, leveraging overhead, all those things. And when I was just expanding enough to where I was going to make a living of this, and I interviewed with Megan to come on board as a client with you guys, what was exciting for me was that I had a financial partner that I could bounce those numbers off of. And then you guys could actually look at my numbers and come at from a different perspective. And that's what we had with Russo when we had our CFO and Mike Russo and his wife, Molly, and our director of operations and me in the room. We were beating up numbers from different directions. But when you're by yourself, you don't have that option. And you think the only way you see numbers is the correct way. And a lot of times it's not, because you're in a fog of what you see moving forward. So it's important to have a partner that you can rely on to go through these things, but starting with the basic of a great chart of accounts. And if you're not sure what a chart of accounts is, it's something that we had with Russo. Every expense we had a bucket: cell phone, uniforms, trash, ice. everything had a bucket in our chart of accounts, and whether it hit on indirect, whether it hit on overhead, whether it hit over here, direct expense, they all trickled down into these amazing Excel sheets that were created over the years. But I think, and it's something that we need to do more of, is actually create almost a workable, usable chart of account that people can get into their businesses so they can understand really how to start one brick at a time of building your budget. So you understand your COGS, overhead, profit, indirect, net profit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I know for a fact, what I learned from Russo, if I didn't have that exposure of really combing through these numbers, building budgets, whittling budgets down when years weren't good or when they were better and we were making changes, if I didn't have that mindset, I definitely would not be in the position that I am right now in my
Mm-hmm.
business. I wouldn't,
Yeah.
I think you overspend because you see the money coming in, and I see a lot of businesses that they have a windfall of a season or a quarter or a job, and they're just like, whoa, man, I've got this extra money, so I'm just going to go buy. And
Yeah.
we were really strict at following a budget and a forecast. And at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the year, if it worked out, that's great. But you can have a great quarter, a great month, and then you can have a horrible quarter and a horrible month,
Yeah.
2 months down the road, and you need to be prepared for that.
That's great. Yeah. So basically, what I hear you're saying is you had a lot of clarity when you started your business, which is what a lot of these guys, when they start out, they're kind of ignorant. It's not their fault, but they just have never been prepared to make these decisions before. And so, what we'd like to do is help give them clarity so they can have a goal and direction and understand all these terminology.
So yeah, an example of that clarity was when I, excuse me, when I started, I was doing QuickBooks Desktop, and I created my own chart of accounts of what I thought needed to be, and they probably were better than the average Joe Schmo. And then when Megan came and looked at my books and says, "No, we're going to go into QuickBooks Online," your chart of accounts that she created for the business was much more in depth than what I did. So I had a basic knowledge of it, and then you and Megan came in and really finite it and it tuned it up more so that you can get a clearer report that you can give to us monthly and yearly with a cash balance and profit and loss statement.
Yeah. Yeah. We spent a lot of time building that out just from our own experiences and seeing what other companies were doing. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of time to get it right per industry. It's not something you can just kind of whip up overnight.
Right.
What numbers do you think every lawn care owner should watch? I get this question a lot when people interview me: daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. What's your kind of go-tos?
The cool thing nowadays, well, good and bad, everything can basically be run on a credit card. And it's great theory. It works well as long as you have the point that you are paying it off every time that statement comes in. You don't want to kick that can down the road. The nice thing about that is it does give you some extension of flexibility of cash flow. So let's say your fuel usage, your material costs and stuff that you know that you're going to get basically 45 days on that from the day you purchase to the time that the statement is due. You're also earning points back on that too, which is another little business give back that you can use. But it also allows you to watch your money a little bit easier than if you were just running cash or checks out of the book. So you always could bring up your credit card statement 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and see where you were in each month, and it categorizes it for you as well. So it's kind of it can be almost a temporary QuickBooks if you're just starting off. When you start bringing people onto the staff, you really need to understand your expenses and revenue that's coming in, the percentage of labor that's going to be used towards that revenue that's being created, to make sure that you have that money for those people, because the last thing you want to not do is pay your people. I mean, they're looking for you in return for trade of what they've done. And if you can't provide that for them, one, they're going to leave, and two, your bad name is going to be spread very, very fast if you can't make your payroll on your people. So I think that needs to be forecasted and looked at weekly and projected 2 weeks out in advance at all times. Profit margins, customer retention. We used to kind of do that in a little different format. Profit margin, we looked at our monthly meeting all the time, just like we do with landscaping bookkeeper. Customer retention, we did that more on a quarterly basis, and we would call those report cards. We would go through customer report cards and see where we were. But a lot of our maintenance programs in the commercial side are long-term contracts, just like in the turf nutrition side, most of our customers are there for the entire season unless something really goes sideways. If you mess something up and they're aggravated with you, or they have a financial reason, then they step away. So you can look at your retention a little bit more from that. Material costs, you should be looking at all of the time, because there's plenty of contractors out or companies out there that want to, as you grow, want to do business with you. And they're looking to offer you little kickbacks or cheaper prices to get in with you. So you need to be really looking at that all times. I mean, last week I had an invite to a supplier that I've never bought anything from, and they were only inviting people to this. It was about a 3/4 of a day event that they've never sold to. Very smart on their part. So, they had the owner of the company come in, explain their whole program, fed you, tour of their facility, and they're a bigger company, but they literally were focusing on people that never purchased from them. Well, they also want to meet next week, and they says we have some pretty good offers that we can continue on to give you as a new customer for the end of your season. So you always want to be looking at that always. And then we kind of talked about it with our quarterlies. You have to pay attention to tax liability of what you're owed. Sales taxes, if your state, I don't think there's, maybe New Hampshire doesn't have sales tax. Maybe there's one state that doesn't have sales tax, but you have to understand how much sales tax you've collected so that you can pay that in. And depending on the amount of tax that you are collecting, they'll ask you if it's going to be monthly or quarterly. When I first started, it was quarterly, and then they start seeing the amount of return that's going in each quarter. Like, nope, we want our money sooner. So now it's going to be monthly. So just something else that you need to watch all the time is your tax revenue coming in and what you're liable to put out so that fines don't be levied on you.
That's good. What do you think the best way to track your labor time is? Like that's a daily thing that people will track. What do you think the best way to do that is, so you can ultimately, I know a lot of pricing is set around that, right? Like your labor cost is what's really been changing in the last few years. It's one of the big ones, right? So what's the best way to kind of track all that?
So it is probably your most expensive liability in running a business is your labor costs. Sure, if you're an owner operator and you're by yourself, you never pay yourself what you're really truly worth, or if you had to be replaced. But when you have a team that is working for you, that is going to be your number one expense that always grows. And when we were Russo, we tracked it before really having this. I've seen the CRM systems go from basically just a customer resource management center of understanding your customer, where they're located, the property that's on it, to then into being able to do estimating, job costing, labor reporting, scheduling, routing. I've seen that all grow to what it is now. And now I personally think that if you do not have some type of CRM system running your business, you're crazy, absolutely crazy. The accuracy that it has, the abilities of you actually doing proper job costing, proper estimating to the customer, looking professional, having a portal where they can actually go in and pay immediately. And then the time tracking that's on there. So like mine itself, if I had a staff with me, but it does it for me, I'm the technician that goes out when it's scheduled, and it runs my route. And that route will give me exact mileage that the route is for the day, mileage between. It logs my stop time and to and from. So when we were Russo, we always had to keep track of stop time, because once you put more than one person in a truck, it's very expensive to drive from job to job when you're paying 3 people, 4 people in a truck to go to the next one. So we would need to recapture that time to move it. Brightview, we would move it to the job behind us. So the job that you left would get the billable to the next one. And Russo, we were the opposite. As soon as we left one job, time would start, travel time, and that would get billed to the next person or the company we're going to work. So, having a CRM system and really tracking the time, that is where, as you bring on 1, 2, 4 people, that all those 5 minutes and 15 minutes and 30 minutes, that is where your profit is being lost. The
Mm-hmm.
fastest way to be lost. Stopping at
Yeah.
gas stations. 3 guys roll out of a gas station, or girls, go in and get a coffee, get an energy drink. Someone gets gas. Oh, and by the way, on the way out, they back into a car and cause $7,000 worth of damage.
Mm-hmm.
We did not allow any gas station or coffee stops whatsoever. We had gas on site. They brought their lunches. We had field supervisors that would go out during the day with coolers full of cold drinks they could drink as many as they want. Here you go. There's a cooler of Gatorade in the back and ice water, just so that they were comfortable, because it cost us too much money for them to stop. It was cheaper to buy the products and have them on ice at all times.
Yeah, that's good. I worked for a small business. I'm not gonna throw any names out there, but we were notorious at just like, and I didn't even realize this because I was really young at the time, but we would just stop there for like, I think we had 5 employees. I can personally attest to how much time is wasted at those gas stations. Like it's unbelievable. At the time, I had no idea. I wasn't like the team lead or anything. I was just the low guy on the totem pole getting drug around, and man, we would just go in there, Subway, everything. So I totally get it. I really like the gas on site and the way you distribute the snacks. I think that's smart. I as a bookkeeper, I see the immense amount of money wasted doing those sorts of things. So that's interesting.
Now it's different if obviously your team members are going to have a set break for a lunch or whatever. Sure. And let's say it coincides that, all right, we just finished that job and we're going to stop at Subway and we're going to take our half hour, get a sandwich. Those things, I can see that arising. We had 80 guys plus.
No, this was like Subway at 8 a.m. This wasn't like your 15-minute break or whatever.
Yeah, no, we would roll out at 7:05, and there was no stopping until you got to the job. And mowers had to be mowing. So that's going to be the easiest way for you to put additional monies into your net profit is to manage the time of the guys out there and getting to and from the job efficiently.
Couldn't agree more. Now, you've had quite the experience in all the different fluctuations since you've been doing this for so long. You dealt with the housing crisis. You've been through all the big ones, right? Like I think you mentioned 9/11. I don't know if the tech bubble had anything to do with that, with economic cycles, but you are an expert at this, in my opinion. How do you deal with fluctuations in all these different market costs? And I guess particularly materials, because you're like the master of moving materials around and getting deals on that stuff. So you got anything to say about all that?
I think the easiest answer to that is relationships. So having relationships with your suppliers that have the pulse on their industry so that they can come to you in advance. We always were looking work-wise 3 to 6 months in advance. Always, always, always. So when May came around, seasonal spring contracts we're already talking snow. We're looking forward to snow. What's going on? What's our renewal going to be? Who's up for renew? What equipment do we need? All our salt purchases. We used to buy our salt right from the barge when it came from, a lot of times it came from Egypt. It came from all different areas. But if they could take it from the barge and not put it in a stockpile, put it in a truck and bring it to us, we would save X amount of percent. So we would buy all our salt. It was in stock by September. So that was based off our relationships to where our supplier would talk to us and say, hey guys, if you want to save an extra 3-5%, how about we do it this way at this time? So the first year we had to prepare for it financially, that we'd need this amount of money because it was basically due as dropped. And then we just set, that was part of our new calendar, that we would have the money set and earmarked in one of our McAllowitz buckets, basically. And we knew that September was salt month. So
down in Florida, we just used the Morton iodized.
Well, here's the crazy thing about it. People don't realize it. It's the same salt. There's no different. The table salt that you use to what's on the road, it's whether it's refined down more and cleaned, and it's all the same stuff.
Well, you saw down here, it comes in the handy little containers. You could just grab them and dump them out the back of your truck in Florida. That's all we do here.
Yeah, we go through tons and tons and tons of it. But it's relationships on the material side that's super important. That's where many of my suppliers came to me last year. I already had it in the back of my mind that election year. That's a bell ringer.
Mm-hmm.
Election year, there's a lot of uncertainties in the market. So a lot of companies need to shore up sureties so that they can do proper forecasting. So that was just from my experience of multiple years in business on other people's, and then taking advantage of it on my business itself. Um, there there is tons of variabilities that we've gone through, like you said, the 2008, 95, 9/11, COVID, all this stuff. And I think that just is part of having a diverse business that's going to have some recurring revenue if you are doing design, build, and construction, and not just relying on one and having all eggs in one basket. And what I mean by that is, here's a perfect example. When 9/11 happened, everything shut down for about 6 months and everyone was scared, but then nobody wanted to travel. So at first you had a hiccup in the economy where, we were losing money and people were nervous about anything, what's going on in our world, to now I don't want to travel and I want to do staycations at home. So let's put the pool in, let's put the patio in. I want a nicer lawn. Let's redo the landscaping. Let's do lighting. We actually went in a positive market after things got settled down and the threats were over of anything happening. So you have to understand the mental aspect of what's happening in the region and market at the time of something like that, where sometimes because it's a negative, you can actually go positive. And COVID was another thing where no one was traveling.
Yeah.
So people had money, they did staycations. All the design build guys in my area killed it the 2 years during COVID. They killed it.
Yeah.
So
it was so interesting for me to watch that because I don't really remember, I was, I think 10 years old during 9/11. But it's like you always say, they should pay you to take psychology instead of business if you go to business school, because it's all about, the economy is just the sum of all these individual personalities and how they're going to respond to certain situations.
And we're in that right now, because if you took the time and listened to mainstream media, which I do not do, but
Me neither.
I've heard some snippets of it. And if you look at the hard math of reports, like you like to look at and I like to look at, the mainstream media, the world's coming to an end. We're bankrupt. We're going broke. But reports just came back. Interest rates are down. Inflation is down. Egg prices are down, if it matters. Gas prices are down, even though the president really doesn't have anything to do with that. But really out of pocket stuff, nothing has increased since the change of the election. It's more just the mental aspect. And like you said, the psychology of how people are thinking. So you have to be prepared for that. And here's my forecast, and we'll be doing these through when I think this will happen. I think by the end of May, our industry is going to go bullcrap. People are going to understand that everything that was happening in the news isn't happening. They have some extra residual money in their pockets because things are down. Interest rates are coming down. Housing market may open up a little bit of inventory, because the only reason we're held on inventory right now is because people don't want to sell the house they're in because they can't find the house they're going to. So once those floodgates even just open, you get a little bit of water coming out. I've seen this happen before after it settles down just a little bit, and then people just start spending money like they were back in COVID. So my prediction is the end of May, beginning of June, I'm thinking you'll see some relief and some expansion in the green industry.
That's good. Yeah, I like how you mentioned diversifying too, with having some maintenance in there. And like Buffett made a lot of his money during times of massive inflation, or when times would get tough, because he would always buy essential businesses. Like I remember Bill Gates approached him back in, I think it was the 80s, and he said, "You need to invest in the computer. It's going to change the world." And he said, it changed the way people chew gum, because he just wanted to invest in gum companies. And it's funny, he missed the boat on the tech bubble, but the man consistently makes ridiculous returns because he does buy things that are essential. And maintenance is one of those things that's just always going to be there. People are always going to have their grass cut. It's just one of those things. And so just understanding the psychology when they start talking about massive inflation or whatever, like those are all categorically speaking to, you may have inflations in certain categories, but they group everything together and create mass fear around just talking in broad generalizations.
So right back to the psychology of the whole thing, there has never been a year since I've been alive that prices have not gone up.
Yeah. Well, the Fed intentionally does that. Like they want it to go up every year.
Right. So everyone's in a tizzy that prices are going up, but projectively going up at the same rate. So what has changed from last year, this year? Your cost of living is going up, your COLA is going up. It's the, like you said, it's the psychology of the whole thing and how people are going to react to it. It's sad. It really, really is. And when you say the tech bubble of wanting to buy gum instead of computers, we're at that right now. And I talked to you the other day about, I have no idea, but Bitcoin and XRP, and I don't want to talk about it because I literally know nothing and I don't understand that, but that's the new tech bubble right now that everyone's banking on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have no doubt that there will be a few survivors when it's all said and done. You had, I study history. I've got one of my books back here is like the cycles of every economic cycle that's ever existed by Ray Dalio. It studies German markets, Swedish markets, like everything. And one of the things that happened during the tech bubble is a lot of people were invested in the .coms, right? Like if it had a .com on it, it was just like gonna boom. And that's not to say that all of those .coms went to crap, but whenever the tide came out, there was a few left that were worth an immense amount of money, but the vast majority of them that never had any earnings or whatever the case was, those things just went completely extinct. And so I have no doubt that crypto will survive, but it's like, which one are you willing to hitch your horse to?
Right.
So I personally don't understand it enough either. I like businesses, but that is the way the cycles of everything work. I know the richest man in the world at one time owned nothing but silver, and he ended up going, I can't remember the name of the guy, but he ended up going flat broke because he had his whole nest egg in silver, and silver market collapsed. But it's all about just understanding something that is attached to something that provides a valuable service to people. And that's the reason I'm not a big crypto guy, is I don't really see the tangible use of it like I can clearly see with a business. And go ahead.
No, it spurred off to the being diverse in what we do and how important, but we're also on the era of the .com, whatever, people are more working from home. Less and less people have lawnmowers to mow their own yards. We're seeing more and more that our service is becoming so needed and demanding, which is awesome because that just makes us more valuable and more people are able to do it. I think I've made this example before. I'm not sure if it's here or on other shows, but when I grew up, there wasn't air conditioning in houses. And when there was, your parents had one window unit and you guys sweated out with the GE box fan in the hallway to try to. Now every house has central air conditioning. It's not built without it. Now you're in Florida, that's different. But up here, the same thing has gone with services. People aren't out pruning their bushes anymore. They're not out doing mulch. They're not out doing weekly mowing. So having some of those recurring revenues as really a stronghold in your company, I think is super important. And if you want to expand into the great projects that can blend into it, that's awesome. That's great. But during some of these economic insecurities, and not saying there is one, but if it's in people's minds and they throttle back on their projects, at least you have their weekly mowing and maintenance that you can keep your business trudging forward.
That's good. How much do you think material should cost you in landscaping versus application, just in terms of a percentage? And we can definitely talk more deep than just a percentage, because I hate percentages getting thrown out there. But what do you think is kind of a benchmark to shoot for?
Well, I know my end side really well now. It'll probably take me a minute to think kind of on the design build start, but
yeah, if you don't know, I was just thinking maybe Russo had some numbers or something.
Yeah, we did. I mean, we Mike was very strict in this. So, there was industry standard of being 30 to 50%. I remember like 28 being a huge number that we wanted to kind of stay at for material costs. So, it's right at that 30 to 50 mark. So we were 28. We were we ran very, very, very lean, and we had good buying power.
And that's for the application side?
Nope.
Or
No, that was for the design build part of it.
Okay.
So when we would take our material costs and then start adding into your overhead and all that to come up with our number that we needed at the end of the job or the bid itself, we would calculate in, let's call it for easy math, 30% of materials. Then we would put our labor into that. Then we would put our indirect and overhead into that. And then that would compute into what the job is going to be. And when I came to Russo, the industry standard was and kind of is still, you still hear this, if you're planting a shrub and or a tree, and I think I've mentioned this before, shrub was 2 times its cost in the ground and a tree was 2.5 times its cost in the ground. And I remember talking about that, doing a bid, thought I was, a big shot coming into Mike as a new guy. And he's like, well, show me the math, how that's going to work. I'm like, well, what do you mean? It's 2 times the cost. It's great. If it was $25, we're going to put it in for 50. He goes, how do you know you're making money? I'm like, oh boy. That's when my education and numbers started. And he said, let's figure it out. Here's the cost of the good. Let's put a reasonable markup on that piece because we have to pay someone to go get it. So we need a margin on that. And then let's figure exactly how long it takes someone to install that in the ground. And then let's come up with that number. And that's how we did our bidding. Everything was bid that way. And we literally had an inventory system in our CRM system that if a PJM rhododendron was this cost, which we knew, depending on the size, was a 3-gallon, 5-gallon, 7-gallon, this is what it was as an install price because we did the math back of how long it takes one team member to put it in the ground, pick it up, get it to the job, and install it. So
interesting.
Yeah, it was really, that's the first time I really started understanding job costing. Mm-hmm. In the application side, you hear guys say 20 to 30% of your materials should be cost. And you'll hear some of them is, if you're over 15% of material cost, you're not making money. If that's the case, I look at those and I see them in the forums and some of the chats. I think when you get to that, trying to be that lean, it's more of an efficiency problem on them actually delivering the materials out into the property compared to buying them at the lowest rate to make up the difference. So I think they just have some other hidden expenses that they haven't dialed in where they need the materials to be that low to get the return that they're looking for.
Yeah, those forums crack me up, especially when they start talking about profit too. That's like my favorite one, or valuations.
Valuations, that's a tough word.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. It's something I've studied a lot of. I've done it more on the corporation side than the small business side, but it's very interesting to me. It just really comes down to what makes something valuable to someone. I see a lot of guys comparing their numbers when they may be 50% maintenance, 50% landscaping. And of course, your material costs are going to be 15% down the middle, right? Like if you just have 50-50 and you're kind of a small business, or you just compare yourself to other businesses that are entirely landscaping or entirely application, like their material costs are going to look different. So I think on forums, a lot of times they're just taking the aggregate of, and there's so many different blends. Like you see a 30-70 blend, 70-30 blend, like they're all going to have different amounts. I think there's a lot of that.
Because, and we've talked about this earlier, I mean, you nailed it, is nobody is keeping track of exact time on each job and what labor is being used. When you can break that down to the levels that you need, and you know what your drive time is, your startup time, your end time, your unloading time, and then you're on the design build side of every minute that's on that job, and you get the job costing done, then you can break them up into 2 buckets, which we did. We always reported our maintenance numbers and our enhancement numbers. They were always 2 separate buckets at Russo. And like you said, if you take and blend those and have an aggregate, sure, that's just math. But how can you correct one side or the other if you don't know what is doing what?
Right. Did you guys do individual pricing on your maintenance side as well? Like when you're setting out a quote or something for that? Or was it more of like, this is our hourly rate and you kind of have your drive time average built into it? Or how did you guys typically do that?
Everything was broken down into hourly rates. So every line item that you did, weekly mowing, bed edging, trimming, all that was based on how many hours is it going to take X amount of team members to do it, and then what materials are involved in that, and the materials with a markup in it. And then we would have dump fees, dump costs, hauling back and forth. All those had line items in our CRM system that would come up to, let's say, an HOA that would be a seasonal cost for them to maintain it for the season. And then it would be broken down into a monthly payment for that organization.
Gotcha. Now, this is a question that gets thrown out all the time. I'm still trying to round out what I think about the whole thing, but how do you handle cash flow in the lawn care industry? Because I see at the really high level, I see a lot of businesses that need cash flow work, and how much of that could have got fixed if they had just done things right from the beginning. So like, for example, we mentioned saving up the safety net. If you kind of have a little bit something to fall back on, does it kind of fix a lot of the cash flow problems in the future, or what are you seeing?
Well, I think it definitely builds on itself in solving problems. Something that people don't realize is if you're, all right, if you're in the residential market and you're doing lawn maintenance, mowing, trimming, and you aspire to get into the next level of going to be doing commercial maintenance. So you get to your first commercial job and you think it's amazing because it's just a bigger property, but most of the time you're working for much less margins on those bigger properties because you're dealing with property managers that are a third party and they need to make their percentage on top of it. And their job is to find the cheaper landscaper that's going to allow them to make their margin on top of it compared to the owner of the property, the homeowner. Now, when you perform those services and they want seasonal contracts. So let's say it's up here was 8 months. It would be 26 cuts, 28 cuts, a spring cleanup, a fall cleanup. So it's 32 visits plus your shrub trimming, all that stuff, all that's blended in on a monthly cost. Well, the springtime is heavily loaded in labor and materials because you have your spring cleanup, you have your fertilizer, you have your bed edging, you have your mulching, and you typically have a pruning, and you've just done all that work and you're lucky to get 2 months payments. So that is where the cash flow is very important in bankrolling, that you now have just paid all your team members, all the labor, all the gas, all the materials, but you've only gotten 2 payments of the 8 payments coming in. So we used to call that Bank of Russo. So we would have that big slush fund so that we could run our spring. And a lot of times in our books, and this is how well we watched it, is we would not go into the black until if we hit black in September, we were having a great year. It was always October. So we would be floating because of the revenue coming in on a monthly basis from these HOAs and commercial properties on a 60-day payment that turns into 120-day with all their fine print. If we weren't black by September, we were just going to have an average year. Typically that was October. And then we start into snow. So the importance as you get into these commercial projects of being able to have that 3 month of expense locked up to use because you are going to use it, I promise you.
Yeah, I think so. We were at Lawn Care Life, and what Greg Crabtree's team calls it is that core capital. It's like having your. It just depends on what your lowest cash flow month is for the year. I think is what they recommend saving up. So if you went negative 12,000 one month, like that's your core capital, and it just depends, based on, if you're a hardscaping business or a maintenance business, just how much you should save up. But that's interesting. I've never talked to you about that.
Yeah, it was hard to swallow and understand. We were talking a lot of money that Bank of Russo would float through the season until it started coming back. And Mike knew the game, and this is the way it was going to be. But man, oh man, it talking about some sleepless nights on his end. Whew.
Yeah,
really, it was tough.
Yeah,
we did have a business line of credit. We typically didn't use it. There were a couple times we had to use it during heavy snow seasons when we had a lot of labor going out and shovelers. But, having a business line of credit at a certain level of your business is nice to have. It's a nice working tool. You want to make sure that you're not abusing it and you're using it properly and it's being paid off as quickly as possible. I did a consultation with a young lady. Actually, it's not even in the green industry. And I was really confused because she started a business and she didn't have to, but she borrowed money from her 401k to start her business. Okay. But she had a schedule to pay it back and she wanted to pay it back a little bit sooner. And she's explaining numbers to me, but I don't think she understood them quite herself. And they didn't make sense to me, but she said, we did $1.5 million. I need to pay back X amount of dollars. It wasn't a huge amount, but she had the money in the bank, but her tax person and financial advisor said, you need a line of credit so you can pay this back to your 401k to get rid of some of the penalties. I'm like, but if you have the money, why don't you pay it? Well, come to find out, they're grossing $1.5 million, but they have not made any money.
Oh, geez.
Everyone talks about that sales number of you can't spend a sales dollar because what's coming in gross revenue has to come all the way down to the bottom. So it made sense why they needed his line of credit. Okay. She didn't understand business enough. She just saw the gross revenue of what they did last year. She's like, oh, I've got all this money. I'm like, Technically, you don't, because you've spent every penny of it and then a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
The bottom line is so crucial, man. Like,
and that's where a line
you
of
can have a
credit
nice little
can be
small
fraudulent.
business. You can have a small business with one person, but if you're profiting 20%, on top of your salary, like, you can stack some cash even at one person. We had a business call us one time. They were, I think they were 1.5 million, kind of a similar situation. And they were doing 60% of their revenue in labor cost. And I was like, well, I don't want to work through that. I was like, just tell them to liquidate the whole thing. That was basically, I didn't say that, but that's what I was thinking. I was like, so we ended up turning them away, but I felt bad for them. It's just not something that we do. We're not like the turn around your debt ridden or like, but at that point, what do? You can't increase cost that much. And so that's just an insane amount to be spending out in labor. It's like they just went out and grabbed every job they could and didn't even think about the pricing or anything, but
It
it happens
sounds
a lot.
exactly. And I think a lot of people think that because it's a big construction install job and it looks like a large amount of money, like you said, if they haven't done the homework and really understand the job costing of what that is going to return, there you go. You're at 60% labor cost. You're going to go nowhere but upside down.
Yeah, exactly. We've talked about this a little bit last year, so you've had a little bit experience with this recently. Tell us the importance of taking a personal salary and accounting for your work in the business. It's something that never really gets brought up. I'm glad that Greg Crabtree's team, I mentioned his, we met one of his associates at Lawn Care Life, and because I love their book, Simple Numbers, Big Profits. And they basically say, which is something I've been trying to harp for a while, is always make sure you account for a salary whenever you're looking at the numbers of any business. And most of the time, that's where you get on these forums and guys are saying they're making 50 or 60% profit. A lot of times they're not profitable at all. They just aren't accounting for how much work they do, which is working 80 hours a week and, having no time off. And so that's why they're making 50% on that. But, a lot of times it's just, they're not accounting for how much they're actually doing,
Well, if you are paying yourself industry standard for the jobs that you're doing, and it should be on the higher end, one, it's forced savings in the business. So when you're taking that salary, sure, you need that to live, but you're also demanding that the business produces that every week. When you're not taking a fixed salary, it's the wild, wild west. We had a good month. We didn't. You don't become as rigid in your processes if you know that, well, I don't have to take a salary this week, or I'm not going to pay my wife this week if she's part of the business. I think that helps the mindset shift of being valid in your true expenses. So I think that is extremely important to do right from the get-go. I have seen many people in other businesses around me that have been extremely successful, that have always set their pay to the highest level possible, and they struggled to pay all the bills afterwards, and they made it work every single time. And one of them just sold his business a year ago for an astronomical amount of money. And there's nights where I can't imagine he slept, but he always forced himself to do that, and his family never suffered. The business never suffered. It forced him to think smarter and be more efficient in his processes, always, every single time.
Yes, 100%. This is a question I'm really interested in how you're going to answer it, because I think about this quite a bit. But what level of transparency do you think that as the owner, should you bring your team members into it? Do you want to be as open as possible? Show them the actual numbers behind your business, or should you? I've personally never worked for a business that showed us the numbers in my younger days, other than, I worked for some corporations that had to, but nobody shows us the impact that they're having, what the company needs to do to survive. Do you think that owners should bring guys into those financial conversations at all?
That's a really good question. And I'm kind of skewed because I've had it both ways. With Russo, it was pretty transparent of our budgeting and where we needed to do to hit goals. When push came to shove, and what like our leadership team would review and go through, was 3/4 of what really was happening. And the other quarter happened in another set of closed doors, which I was privy to. Luckily, our office manager, Joanna, was. But then when we brought in a couple of our advisors, and one of them was Kevin Kehoe, who basically started Aspire with Mark Tipton, very well-known person, unfortunately passed away. He was awesome, just an amazing person, and could go through budgets very well. That level in the smaller closed doors was much more precise in the numbers. Mike was so here's what we would do. We would educate even the earliest form of employee that would come in, someone that didn't have a driver's license. Maybe they were just I hate to use the word, but the laborer. They were just going to weed whack and blow until they had better training. And every day our crews were tasked with managing their own budget. Hours. Everything was projected hours for each job and for the day and drive time. And all those were equated on a whiteboard on schedule for each crew. And they would keep track whether they were positive or negative. Green was positive for the day, red was negative. And then it would be tallied up each day and at the end of the week. So we started people having command and control of their budget, which affected profitability. And then we would show them how that would benefit them as it would slide up to the company and benefit us in other buckets. As you went up in the management team, from field supervisors to crew leaders to account managers and then directors from there, it just became a little bit more open and transparent of how those numbers work together. And I think that's very important, because everyone has a piece and understands their level of reporting and success on it. And then the roll up is just more of who has more mental capacity to handle that and understand that these numbers are private. And that's just going to be something that you have to figure out with your team, who is going to be trustworthy of that. Because people love to talk. So as soon as they get some numbers and they're having a few pops here and there, and they want to talk, hey, I was at a meeting today, we're doing $7.2 million and this is our gross profit. So you have to be careful of that to some degree. But I think it's important that everyone does understand what piece of the pie they're contributing to.
Yeah. I did a lot of labor roles in my early 20s, and I've been a part of a lot of the conversations. Like I remember one we had back before I understood any of it, but the guys would just say, "Do you know how much they're making on us per hour? Like they're paying you, $15 an hour, but they're actually billing you out at $70 an hour, and the rest they're just keeping the rest." It's kind of like if you hear on the news, like the greedy corporations or the greedy businesses or whatever. It's just like they think that's the level of understanding that most people have of business, is like the business is making a astronomical amount of money off of you, and they're billing you out and using your labor. I just heard a lot of conversations like that, but you're right. At the same time, it's easy to intimidate people with these numbers because they're not used to talking them all the time. So I like the tiered approach that you're talking about.
And it would be a challenge, if that conversation came up. Oh, they're paying me $20 an hour and they're billing me out at $70 an hour. That would be something that works into a very constructive time on the whiteboard to show that group of people how it actually rolls up, and what your $20 an hour, by the time we put FICA and SUTA and food into there, that percentage, and then we have to put in this into it, and then we have our insurance costs into it, and then you roll it up and you look at the very end, I have risk as I'm the owner of the company. This is all that's really left over. So sometimes the big numbers can be scary and they can't understand that. But if you put it down into that hourly rate of what the bill out is and what you're receiving as a team member for that position, and you break it down to that math, now you're just talking $4 or $5 difference by the time you're done. And they realize the company's only getting $7 an hour on top of it.
Right.
It takes that much money and revenue to produce. Oh, okay. And the light bulb goes off. They can handle those numbers.
Yeah, I just don't see a lot of those conversations happening from my personal experience, and I think it's something that should happen a lot more. I think you'd have a much more engaged team if they knew exactly what was going on in terms of just the bill out and everything.
So I guess if you want to be successful in your business and grow, you want your business to be able to run without you. So if you don't start at the early stages, and if you don't want to scale, great. If you want to scale and you want to bring us to something of the next level, you have to understand that you can't do everything. So you need to start training your entire team at what level that they can handle the acceptance of profitability and what they're performing. And your job is to basically train people to do your job without you being there.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you're going to buy your time back. And if you feel as if you have to be there, or you haven't educated your team members enough for your absence, then you're not scaling a company.
Mm-hmm. Last question, because I know we're running short on time here. This one a lot longer than I expected, but you got two numbers guys talking numbers that can kind of go on for a while. No, you're good. I like the longer form, but I know a lot of times I think the 30 to 45 minute works best, because guys will be at a job site for 45 minutes listening, and then they got to get back in the truck. And so I think that's actually in our industry, the 45 minute actually works pretty good. But I am really, really passionate to tell people how wealth is created in this country. And it's not through your personal salary, but it's rather through creating a vehicle that has value. Just really wanted to have a quick conversation with you on what makes something valuable. And guys need to learn this before they start scaling. You're not going to have much more money in your pocket when you scale from 100,000 to $1 million. You're just not. Most of it is going to get reinvested into building something that is valuable for someone else to eventually purchase from you. So we call that the equity side of the equation, or the book value. And this never gets talked about. And it's what keeps people in poverty for so long, is they don't understand that you're building something that can be a life-changing amount of money if you stick with it. And just understanding how value is created. I think I saw a statistic on how much value and growth of the economy that entrepreneurs bring to the table. And it's an astronomical amount of money compared to just the normal person working for a salary every day. And I think that's the way out of poverty for most of the world, is entrepreneurs creating something of value and having that value continue to work for them. It's not about collecting all this cash. When you start out early on in business, you just want to have a lot of cash in your pocket so you can buy jet skis, and you can buy all these toys, and you can buy the big house on the hill, and you can live like all these actors. When in reality, most business owners keep most of their money working for them and creating valuable services for the rest of the world. What do you think the mindset shift is there, where guys need to start working more towards creating a vehicle of value, rather than, I just want to draw this much money and have this much money so I can just play with it all day? I think that's the mindset shift that needs to happen in this country. People don't understand that concept. It's foreign.
I think the start of it is in having a small business that has repeatable services that can be taught and repeated over and over again with success. And when that happens, that allows you to step out of that position and move to the next position. And each one of those positions that you step forth in needs to be in the investment focus that you're good at doing, because you just created this business that has repeatable processes. What's the next challenge that you have, as that one is self-sufficient in itself? And it doesn't mean that it needs to be a second business or a third business. It could just be another service model or saleable piece within your name that you're using. But having more and more repeatable, recurring revenue aspects that you can have people running for you, that you can run without you there, is when the value is just going to increase dramatically compared to working for a salary. The more money you make in that salary, the more you're giving to taxes, the less time you're going to have for yourself. When you become an entrepreneur, when you can be more creative in the finance of it, and you can propel other people to succeed and reach for some financial goals of their own. Remember, every time that someone is doing some type of work within your company for you, you are getting a profit from that as well. And that money grows at such a faster rate than putting your money in a 401k or a Roth or in one of these pieces. And that money just compiles, because now that you have that little bit of nest egg or large nest egg, you're looking for another investment with that money. And when you become an entrepreneur, I think it becomes harder and harder to take that money that you've sweat for and put it into the open stock market that's so volatile, compared to in a business where you have so much more control of its success or fail.
Yeah, I think of entrepreneurs as kind of an architect. Like, you have to have a vision of what you're building. So you're building a house, and you need a way of like getting all the materials, getting all of the contractors on site, making sure the days all work together. Like that's literally what you're doing on an entrepreneurial level, but you're doing it with different components and different parts each time. You're building something. You have to have a vision and a goal of what you're pushing people towards. And that's how value creation happens. Somebody had a vision. Somebody put together these people at this time with this CRM, with this truck, and with this all this other stuff, and they put it all together and they created something called profit that reinvests into it and helps more and more people. I heard Hormozy talk about how the difference in levels of success of different people with different amounts of net worth is just the amount of people that they've helped. And so that's the way I like to think about entrepreneurship. You're helping more and more people as your wealth grows, and that's kind of I think how wealth generation happens, but it's not necessarily taught. It's just something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs eventually figure out, but they don't eventually start out that way. It's just they start off trying to just get out of the grind, and that's ultimately what you're doing. You're creating more and more value for more and more people, and that's what increases real GDP. It's not all this nonsensical numbers that they throw out and finagle and everything. It's like create something of value for the world, man, and then expand that to more and more people. You're an architect. You're somebody that collects things together and builds something great out of it.
So when, I think a simple example in the growth and the scalability of one of these businesses is when you get to the success level that you need a building. So now you have the ability that your business is going to pay for a building that no money comes out of your personal pocket whatsoever. I've lived this experience, and the business is now paying for that business or that building itself. So now you've just created a real estate nest egg that is being bought by the monthly profits that are coming in your business, that in one day is either going to be paid off, or you've had the nest egg to pay for that down. And now let's say it's time for the business to go bye-bye. So now we have that recurring revenue of a rental piece of property that's going to come in and self-fund, or you move into a building that can support your business and another business. So now you're helping another business create their wealth within your platform, but you're also benefiting and growing your net worth from the same thing. Just thinking in different ways of how you can not only personally grow wealth for yourself, but another entity that's going to be a sublet rental in that business is now they're succeeding thanks to your gratitude, and you're both succeeding from that same thing at exponentially growth that you're not going to get with a paycheck any day.
I think that there's this common thread throughout history of whoever's in charge wants to make you think that wealth is static. And I just want to get the message out there that wealth is elastic. Like, and it comes from stuff like this. It's like, that's how people get out of poverty. It's not through fear and doom and gloom, and we have to take all the money from the rich and give to the poor, like that mentality. It's that stop believing that everything is the way it is and start creating something. And that's how you're going to pull people out of poverty. It's that creator's mindset. And throughout history, that's always been the fear. That's how people have always maintained control is, hey, there's only so much to go around, and we got to do terrible and awful things to make sure that everybody stays in line, to make sure that the resources aren't all taken up. And if everybody becomes not a creator and you're not doing anything like that, then everything is static. And unfortunately, that could be the reality. But the cool thing about America is we can create wealth, and we do lift people out of poverty. And that's what's beautiful about it.
And the proof in the pudding is something that I missed just because of my age, but the digital era and seeing what people are making on the digital side of creativity. It's crazy the wealth that they're generating from, and some of that wealth is going to be changing for a few generations to what they're doing. So it's there. The availability is there. It's just having the strength and the courage to go out and try and do it. You will succeed. You will.
Think about how much you've learned just from this creator economy that we're living in with YouTube, and how much that's bettered you and me. And I've learned from some of the best in the business just watching their videos, and it helps me do things better, and I can create more because I'm listening. You're kind of seeing a lot of money flow out of the universities, and a lot of it into these like mentorships and coaching and online videos and things like that, going to more the individual level. And I don't know. It's just so cool to watch, man. We live one of the wildest times.
It's why we came together, is because of what we see happening over the next 15 years. It's going to be life-changing for a great group of people that are willing to either take that risk or do not have the mindset to go into university and be brainwashed into the processes that will give them absolutely nothing. Sure, if you're going to be in the medical field or something like that, you need that type of education. But in the true wealth generation, you're not going to get that from a 4-year college degree and going to work for someone. Look at Cody Sanchez. She's a perfect example of it. She went to university and then she went and did internships at some of the biggest investment companies out there. And she learned more in her internships and working for these companies. And now look at her. She's killing it. And
it's wild to me how they can retain a lot of these investment banker people, because they are extremely smart in how a business operates, but somehow they retain them and keep them there for a long time, working 80 hours a week at Goldman or whatever. I don't know how they just don't all quit and start their own thing. It's like, you don't know how to do it. Like, you know how to talk about it, but you just, like, you have the knowledge to do it. Why don't you get out there? That's what's cool about her story.
Yeah. And I think it's changing, because I think everyone was just so afraid to take the chance, and they made it seem like you can't do it. And she just sidestepped them and goes, I'll show you. And she has.
Yeah.
And so I think you're going to see more and more of that, which is really exciting.
I think it's tough too. You know, a lot of these, I don't know Cody's situation, but a lot of them have $100,000 for $100,000 of debt at Columbia or something, or Wharton. And then they have to keep the job making $200,000 at Goldman, or
exactly what they want.
And yeah. And so they're stuck, man. You're a slave to the lender, right? Like the old Dave Ramsey quote, but, or I guess biblical quote, but, man, Kevin, this was a good episode. Hour and a half, man. That's pretty dense.
I'm sorry. I love this topic. So it's like, we
it's
keep
great,
going
man.
on. So
yeah, it's good, man.
If people need to hit pause halfway through and catch the other half in the next day.
Yeah, I might release this as a 2-part episode, because I like 2-hour interviews, and I've done just releasing the whole thing at one time. But I think Paul Jameson shows us best just like release them in 2-part series, because just the nature of the industry. But you know, I'm the type of guy that, and I think you do too, but I'll listen to a whole Joe Rogan or something, like when I'm doing something. So,
right. But not everyone has the flexibility that you and I have when we're listening to stuff.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I appreciate you having me, and I'm excited with the outline you sent over, the continuous scalability of what we want to talk to in the business, and get these young entrepreneurs out there just churning in the cash, because it's out there, we're ready to grab.
Man, I'm so pumped, and just releasing these all on YouTube. Hopefully I can, the challenge is releasing it all in an organized fashion. Like, I really want it to read like a book, you know, like this is the freaking manual for growing a large landscaping company. We're going to do God knows how many hours on this, 40 hours or whatever.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's freaking sick. And if you enjoy the show, give us a follow. Make sure that you're getting updates when we drop another episode. These are all going to drop on Wednesday. On Mondays, I typically release like a little interview or something, but every Wednesday is the scaling series. So give us a follow, 5-star review if you really enjoyed the episode. And Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this, man.
Always my pleasure. Can't wait for next week.
Absolutely, man. We'll see you next week.
Alrighty.